Welcome to the 2014 edition of the Scholars Forum. This year we're focusing on transitions, which can mean transitions between stages in the writing process, and it can mean transitions from one kind of writing to another. Today we're delighted to have Natasha Rebry with us. Dr. Rebry has recently completed her PhD in Interdisciplinary Studies here at UBC Okanagan, and she now teaches in Creative and Critical Studies. Her work focuses on Gothic literature and on the relationship to psychology, and we're delighted to have her here to talk about her experiences, some of the transitions she's been through, and some of the writing she does. Welcome, Natasha.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
What kinds of writing do you do? What do you write about in particular?
I tend to write on literature, in particular Victorian literature and culture, and I especially focus on popular genres such as Gothic fiction and science fiction. And as you said, I read these texts in conjunction with psychology, or more broadly, I might say, studies of mind. So I also look a little bit at neurology, something that was called mental physiology, as well as the early stages of psychoanalysis. And so I look especially at the ways in which these popular texts engage with the scientific theories of the day and how they might develop, engage with, even sometimes challenge the suggestions made by scientists in their work.
When you're in that writing process, how do you get started? How do you go from that initial idea or research stage into the process of actually writing that many of us find so difficult?
I find for myself, I really need to begin with a lot of careful brainstorming. And this perhaps might be particularly important for doing interdisciplinary work. I find that I transition best from research to writing by using something like a concept map that allows me to visualize the myriad potential connections that I could make between the different topics, depending on whatever subject that I'm looking at. After I've done a little bit of brainstorming, I like to do some planning. In particular, I like to begin with obviously a clear central argument in mind, and I like to consider the best order to present my ideas. That being said, I do find that some of my best ideas tend to emerge during the drafting stage of writing. And so it's perhaps a bit of balancing between having a clear plan and goal in mind and remaining open and flexible to the project as it naturally unfolds.
In that process of transition, I guess even within the writing stages, do you find that your voice has changed or transitioned in your writing?
Very much so. I found that particularly going through the process of writing my dissertation was very formative for me developing my own, what I would consider to be unique voice. When I first began the process of writing my dissertation, I found myself perhaps ventriloquizing or mimicking the voices and styles of other writers who I admired. And I feel that that was largely related to a lack of confidence in my own interpretive methods, and by extension, my own modes of expression. Voice for writers isn't necessarily just a particular way of putting words together, but also tends to reflect our approach to our subject matter. And so as I developed more confidence in my own unique approaches, I was able to develop my own unique voice. And I find that the voice that has emerged for me right now as a professional scholar would be one that is serious, but perhaps a little playful. The literary scholar audience is one that can appreciate the creative use of language. And so while I'm always careful to maintain the serious tone that's characteristic of scholarly writing in general, I find that I'm able to bring in perhaps an occasional metaphor or pun to make my writing a little bit more unique.
Since we're talking about process, do you feel that your writing process has actually changed over the years as you've gone from your PhD writing into professional writing?
Very much so. I would say that my writing process is more refined today than it was as a student. In particular, I give myself much more time for planning and revising documents. I also tend to approach drafting differently. So I approach drafting very much with the goal of getting some ideas on paper and then leaving comments for myself in the margins to highlight places where I know I want to spend more time during revising. So I definitely take more time to plan and revise my documents than I did as a student.
Mm-hmm.
I also find that I like to break larger projects up into smaller projects. So I give myself a series of milestones, if you will, and that helps to feel as though I'm progressing, because sometimes a writing project can be quite large. And I find that if I have particular, smaller, more manageable goals, that it keeps me moving forward in the writing process.
Because I know you've been working in an interdisciplinary area, are there particular tips or suggestions you would have for interdisciplinary scholars who might be working with really large projects?
In terms of negotiating different disciplines, I think that it's important for those of us who engage in interdisciplinary work to be really mindful of the differences in genres and disciplines. So using my own research and writing as an example, looking at a scientific document is really different than looking at a piece of literary fiction. Scientists and writers of fiction might explore similar topics, but their goals, their methods, even their styles are very unique and different. So I find that it's important to be familiar with the various conventions, styles, goals, methods of the different disciplines that you're working with. And interestingly, when we take the texts from one discipline and view them through the lens of another discipline, the differences between them actually become more pronounced, is what I've discovered. And so I find that it's been important for me to be really clear on my methodology, so how I'm approaching the interpretation of something like a psychological text. If I intend to read a psychological text with the methods of literary analysis, I find that I need to clarify that for my readers so that there's no potential confusion, because although it might be illuminating to read a scientific document through the lens of literary studies, it's not the same as writing a scientific text. It's actually quite different in many ways. Scientists don't often use creative language in the same way that writers of fiction use, so it can be vastly different approaches to a similar topic, like something related to psychology, for example.
I also wanted to ask you about the transition from dissertation writing or writing a certain kind of document in that sense to writing research articles, which are a different genre of document.
Certainly very different genres, a dissertation and something like a research article. A dissertation tends to really be geared towards testing a writer's ability to do things like collect, organize, and interpret their evidence. And to that end, almost all claims need to be documented and justified. The audience is also quite different for a dissertation than it is for a regular research article. The audience for a dissertation is quite small. It's the examination committee, and it's really comprised of specialists, experts on that particular topic or subject matter. The audience for a research article is much more diverse, much broader, and I find that you can make perhaps some assumptions about the knowledge base of this broader audience, and therefore you don't necessarily have to justify each and every claim that you might make in a research article. The other difference that I've really noticed, in addition to audience, between a dissertation and writing a research article would obviously be the length and the scope. So in a dissertation, a writer is able to explore a number of interrelated ideas, whereas the topic and the argument in a research article must be much more focused, to the point, if not concise at times.
Thank you, Natasha, and thank you for joining us. Please feel free to check out other videos on the Scholars Forum.